There is a specific kind of silence that happens when the power goes out and does not come back. Not the comfortable quiet of a late night. Not the brief flicker before the lights return. Something different. A silence with weight to it. The refrigerator stops humming. The air conditioner winds down. The router loses its glow. And for a moment, just a moment, the house feels like it belongs to a different century. Most people stand there and wait. They walk to the window. They check their phone. They assume someone, somewhere, is already fixing it. And that assumption is the first mistake. What most people do not understand about power grid failures is how quickly the small things become the large things. Not in hours, in minutes. The first concern is light, then temperature, then water pressure, which drops in multi-story buildings almost immediately when the pumping systems lose power. Then food, then communication, then medicine, then the slow, creeping realization that the modern home, designed entirely around uninterrupted electricity, has far fewer backup systems than anyone assumed. On August 14th, 2003, a software bug in an Ohio energy management system triggered a cascade failure that blacked out roughly 55 million people across the northeastern United States and parts of Canada. It happened on a warm summer afternoon. Within 2 hours, subway systems were evacuating passengers from dark tunnels. Hospitals were running on generator fuel they had not planned to replenish. Traffic signals across 8 states went dark simultaneously, and millions of people arrived home to realize they had no plan for what to do next. The blackout lasted up to 4 days in some areas. 55 million people. Most of them completely unprepared. What is striking about that event, and about nearly every major grid failure since, is not what stopped working. It is what kept working. Quietly, without drama, without anyone noticing until they needed it. That is what this video is about. Not the gear you should buy, not the expensive systems, not the prepper bunkers or the industrial generators. This is about the 10 things that already exist in your home, your habits, or your community that continue functioning when the grid goes dark. Things most people walk past every single day without understanding their real value. By the time we reach number 1, there is a good chance you will look at something in your home differently than you ever have before. Not because it is dramatic, because it is the opposite of dramatic. It is quiet and old and deeply reliable in a way that almost nothing else is. Let us begin. Number 10 is something most people throw away without a second thought, and it is one of the first things that becomes genuinely valuable in the hours after a grid failure. Cast iron, specifically cast iron cookware. The heavy, dark, seasoned pans that sit at the back of kitchen cabinets or hang on walls as decoration in homes where they are never actually used. In an era of non-stick surfaces and induction ranges, cast iron feels like a relic. It is heavy, it requires specific care, and it heats unevenly on modern cooktops. Most people who own one inherited it. Some bought it for aesthetic reasons. Very few understand what they actually have. Here is what cast iron does that nothing else does. It retains heat with extraordinary efficiency, and it works on every heat source known to exist. Open flame, propane burner, charcoal grill, wood fire, a rocket stove made from 4 cinder blocks. Cast iron does not care what is generating the heat. It accepts it, holds it, and distributes it with a consistency that modern non-stick pans cannot match over anything other than a calibrated electric element. This matters because most electric stoves and induction cooktops become completely useless when the power fails. Glass-top ranges cannot work over an open flame. Modern flat-top surfaces can crack from thermal shock. But cast iron, the same material humans have been cooking on since at least 770 BCE in China, and continuously in Western kitchens since the 15th century, functions exactly the same way it did before electricity existed. There is something else most people miss about cast iron during a crisis. Because it retains heat so well, It actually reduces the amount of fuel you need to cook. You heat it once, get it fully hot, and the pan continues cooking food even after you reduce or remove the heat source. In a situation where propane is rationed or wood is limited, that thermal efficiency becomes genuinely important. A modern aluminum pan loses its heat almost immediately. Cast iron keeps it. If you own one and never use it, pull it out tonight. Season it if it needs it. Practice cooking one meal on your outdoor grill with nothing but that pan and whatever heat source you have access to. It takes about 20 minutes to realize you already own something that most people in the developed world forgot was revolutionary. And what comes next on this list is something even older than cast iron. Something so fundamental that entire civilizations were built around it. And yet most modern families have almost none of it on hand. Number 9 will seem almost too simple. That is precisely why it matters. Stored water that is physically accessible without any infrastructure. Not the city water system. Not the tap. Not the water that flows when the municipal pumping stations are running. Water that exists right now in your home, in containers you control. That requires no electricity and no municipal system to access. Here is a detail most people do not realize. In most urban and suburban homes, the water pressure you experience at the tap is not gravity-fed. It is pump-fed. Electrical pumps at water treatment facilities and booster stations throughout the distribution system maintain that pressure continuously. When those pumps lose power, which happens in major outages even before your neighborhood loses electricity, because the grid failure is often regional, pressure drops. In apartment buildings above 3 or 4 stories, water often stops flowing entirely within the first few hours of an extended outage. In some areas of New York City during Hurricane Sandy in 2012, high-rise residents lost water pressure on the same day the power failed. Some waited 2 weeks. Even in single-family homes with gravity-assisted systems, the water that flows from a tap during a power failure is the water already in the pipes and in the municipal tower. And there is a finite amount of it before pressure normalizes to 0. FEMA recommends 1 gallon of water per person per day as a minimum for drinking and basic sanitation. For a family of 4, 3 days of stored water means 12 gallons at the absolute minimum. Most American households have essentially none. Not stored in any intentional way. They have the water in their pipes, the ice in their freezer, and the water in their water heater tank, which most people never think to access and which is actually safe to use in an emergency. The hot water heater. That is one of the single most overlooked water reserves in any home. A standard residential water heater holds between 40 and 80 gallons. It is gravity-fed from a tank. In an emergency, you can access that water by opening the drain valve at the bottom of the unit. It is not the freshest water. It has been sitting at heat, but it is potable. And in an emergency, 40 gallons of accessible water is the difference between 3 days of reasonable function and a very difficult first afternoon. Store water. Intentionally. In containers you own. On a shelf that requires no power to reach, and know where your water heater drain valve is. The next item on this list is something that generates controversy every time it comes up, because people underestimate it until the moment they desperately need it. Number 8 is communication, and specifically, the type of communication that functions without cellular towers, without internet infrastructure, and without any connection to the power grid at all. Battery-powered and hand-crank AM/FM NOAA weather radios. This sounds boring. It sounds like something your grandparents owned, and that is almost exactly the point. The modern communication infrastructure is extraordinarily fragile. Cellular towers run on backup batteries that last between 4 and 8 hours under normal load. When an outage is widespread, those towers experience a surge in usage, everyone calling at once, which depletes backup batteries far faster than manufacturers assume. After the 2003 Northeast Blackout, cellular networks in New York and Toronto began failing within hours, not because the towers had no backup power, But because the volume of calls overwhelmed the system while simultaneously running down backup batteries faster than they could be recharged. The internet, similarly, depends on routers, servers, and exchange points that require continuous electricity. Most home internet service dies with the router, and most people's primary source of news, emergency alerts, and situational awareness in 2025 is their phone, which is also depleting its battery at an accelerated rate because it keeps searching for signal in an area where signal is degraded. NOAA Weather Radio. All hazards broadcast continuously on 7 specific frequencies between 162 and 400 MHz and 162 and 550 MHz. These broadcasts run from National Weather Service offices that have backup generator systems designed to operate for days. During Hurricane Katrina, when cellular infrastructure across Louisiana and Mississippi was destroyed, NOAA radio broadcasts were the primary source of emergency information for survivors who had any battery-powered receiver. During the 2021 Texas freeze, Winter Storm Uri, NOAA radio continued broadcasting road closures, warming center locations, and infrastructure updates to anyone listening, while cellular networks buckled under simultaneous outages and surging demand. A hand crank radio costs between $20 and $40. It requires no batteries, no charging, no external power of any kind. 3 minutes of hand cranking typically produces enough charge for 30 to 60 minutes of listening. Some models also charge via solar panel or USB when power is available. It is one of the most quietly powerful tools a household can own, and surveys consistently show that fewer than 1 in 5 American households has one. What you hear on that radio in the first 12 hours of a major outage shapes every decision you make after. Whether to stay or go, whether to open the refrigerator, whether to call a family member or wait. Information in the early hours of a crisis is more valuable than almost any physical item. And a hand crank radio is how you get it when everything else is silent. But information only helps if you can act on it. And acting on it, at night, requires the item we are looking at next. Number 7 seems obvious until you look at how most people actually store it, which is to say, incorrectly, incompletely, or not at all in any meaningful quantity. Light. Specifically, quality light that is accessible immediately, that lasts, and that serves different functions for different moments. The psychology of darkness during an extended outage is something emergency management researchers have studied carefully, particularly after major events. What they consistently find is that darkness, particularly darkness in a home with children, with elderly family members, or in an unfamiliar environment, triggers anxiety at a speed and intensity that surprises most adults. This is not irrational. It is deeply biological. Human beings are not well adapted to navigating environments without light, and the sudden loss of the artificial lighting we take for granted creates a psychological pressure that affects decision-making, sleep, coordination, and morale in measurable ways. After the Northeast Blackout of 2003, emergency room visits in affected cities spiked not from major disasters, but from minor injuries, people navigating dark stairwells, tripping over objects, burning themselves on open flame candles placed on unstable surfaces. The injuries were preventable. They were the product of poor light planning. Most households have 2 or 3 flashlights scattered in different drawers, with batteries of uncertain charge. They have candles, often decorative ones, that are not designed for extended use and that carry significant fire risk when placed improperly. And they have phone flashlights, which are intense, effective, and depleting the one communication device that needs to last as long as possible. What works during a grid failure is a layered light system. Headlamps, hands-free, LED with fresh batteries for navigation and active tasks. Battery-powered LED lanterns that illuminate an entire room rather than a single beam. For family gathering spaces and kitchens. Candles in appropriate holders on stable surfaces away from flammable materials. For ambient light that does not drain batteries. And a solar-powered outdoor light, brought inside, that recharges during the day and provides gentle illumination overnight. LED technology has transformed emergency lighting. A quality LED lantern on its lowest setting can run for 100 hours or more on a single set of batteries. A set of 4 AA batteries costs less than $2 and can keep a family's primary gathering space lit for 4 or 5 nights. That is not an expensive preparation. It is a precise and inexpensive one. What most people do not think about is the difference between light for navigation and light for morale. A lantern on the kitchen table during dinner, even during a blackout, makes the situation feel manageable. Sitting in complete darkness while eating cold food from a can feels like a crisis. The physical circumstances may be identical. The psychological experience is entirely different. Light is one of the fastest and cheapest ways to maintain normalcy when normalcy has been disrupted. Now, if light is how you maintain morale at night, the next item is how you maintain something even more fundamental. And it is one most people overlook until the discomfort becomes impossible to ignore. Number 6 is temperature management, and it works in both directions. Keeping warmth in when it is cold, and keeping heat out when it is summer. Without requiring any powered systems at all, the insulating properties of your home, combined with deliberate behavioral choices about how you use space. This sounds like it is not an item, but it is a principle that functions like a system, and understanding it can be the difference between a manageable inconvenience and a dangerous situation. Here is what most people do not realize about home insulation. A well-insulated house retains heat for far longer than anyone expects after the heating system fails. The 1998 Quebec ice storm, one of the most catastrophic weather events in Canadian history, left approximately 3 million people without electricity for anywhere between a few days and several weeks in the middle of winter. Temperatures outside reached well below freezing, but many families who sheltered in the best insulated room of their home gathered together, sealed drafts, and covered windows with extra blankets or heavy curtains, found that interior temperatures remained survivable. Not comfortable, but survivable, for significantly longer than they anticipated. The principle at work is what thermal engineers call heat retention capacity. A home that is fully heated to 68 degrees Fahrenheit will cool down very slowly in the first few hours without heating, particularly if the household stops opening exterior doors, seals gaps around doors and windows, and concentrates warmth in a single room. A space that holds 6 people generates approximately the same heat output as a small space heater. Body heat, combined with adequate insulation and sealed windows, can maintain a small room at a tolerable temperature for many hours in cold weather. In summer, the challenge reverses, and it is in some ways more dangerous. Heat-related illness during power outages kills more Americans annually than almost any other outage-related cause. During the July 2006 heat wave that coincided with extended outages in Missouri, over 100 people died in St. Louis alone. Many of them in homes without working air conditioning, where interior temperatures had climbed above 100 degrees. The critical mistake in most of these cases was remaining in the warmest part of the house, typically upper floors, and failing to take advantage of the coolest available spaces. The lowest floor of a home, a basement, if available, maintains temperatures significantly below the upper stories during summer heat events. Closing blinds and curtains during the day keeps radiant heat from sunlight out of interior spaces. Cross ventilation at night, opening windows on opposite sides of the house when outdoor temperatures drop, cools the interior more efficiently than any powered system running at a fraction of capacity. None of this requires a purchase. All of it requires knowing your home well enough to use it correctly. When the conditions change, what comes next is the item that quietly makes everything on this list more possible. And it is something most American families underestimate by a factor of about 10. Number 5 is manual tools. Not power tools, not the drill, the circular saw, or the electric sander. The simple non-powered equivalents that do the same jobs without any connection to the grid. A manual can opener is the most obvious example. And it is also a useful illustration of how far the problem extends. After Winter Storm Uri paralyzed Texas in February 2021, supply chain researchers at the University of Texas documented something unexpected. A significant number of families who had stocked canned goods, the recommended emergency food, were unable to access them. Not because they did not have cans, because they had electric can openers and no manual alternative. In the 21st century, the manual can opener has largely disappeared from American kitchen drawers. It has been replaced by its electric counterpart. And the electric counterpart has been replaced in many homes by canned goods that have been replaced by fresh and frozen food that assumes continuous refrigeration. This is the kind of cascading dependency that only becomes visible when one link fails. Manual tools extend well beyond the kitchen. A hand-powered water pump, if your home uses a well system, a hand drill, and a basic set of bits, a manual pump for your car's gas tank, if you need to transfer fuel from a generator to a vehicle or between containers. A handsaw for basic wood tasks if an extended outage means cutting kindling or making repairs. A non-electric thermometer, because knowing whether food is still safe, whether a fever is developing, or whether a room has become dangerous requires temperature measurement that does not depend on a battery-powered display. The manual tool category also includes something people rarely consider: a mechanical alarm clock. In the first 24 hours of a major outage, sleep schedules fragment. People stay awake monitoring the situation, checking their phones, managing children who are anxious in the dark. They finally sleep deeply and miss the window when help arrives, when a store opens, when a neighbor with a generator offers to help charge devices. A wind-up or battery-operated alarm clock costs almost nothing and provides time management that does not deplete any digital device. Manual tools are a category, not a single item. And the underlying message of that category is this: for every powered convenience in your home, there is usually a non-powered version that was used for decades before the electric version existed. The electric version is faster, easier, and almost always preferable, right up until the moment it is not. The next item goes deeper into that same idea, but it is about a skill, not a tool. And it is the one that most people feel embarrassed to admit they no longer have. Number 4 is fire, specifically the practical, controlled ability to create, manage, and cook over fire, without any powered ignition, without any gas line, and without any system that depends on infrastructure. This is not about a dramatic wilderness skill. This is about a barbecue grill and a $20 bag of charcoal, or a propane camp stove and a spare cylinder, or a fire pit and dry wood. The ability to create controlled outdoor heat for cooking is one of the most undervalued household capabilities in the modern era. And the key word is outdoor, because the common and deeply dangerous mistake people make during power outages is attempting to cook over open flame indoors. Charcoal grills, propane burners, and camp stoves must never be used inside a home or in an attached garage. They produce carbon monoxide, a colorless, odorless gas that kills without warning. According to the CDC, carbon monoxide poisoning spikes dramatically in the days following major power outages and winter storms. Not from house fires, but from people attempting to heat and cook indoors with outdoor equipment. During and after Hurricane Katrina, carbon monoxide poisoning was responsible for more deaths than many of the storm's direct effects in the weeks following landfall. The outdoor fire capability that works is simple. A gas or charcoal grill that can boil water and heat food is sufficient for most emergency cooking needs. A 30-pound bag of charcoal, stored dry, can provide cooking heat for many days of meals. Propane cylinders for camp stoves are shelf-stable for years, require no maintenance, and connect to camp stoves that retail for less than $50. What makes this item number 4, rather than further down the list, is what it provides beyond calories. Cooking over fire during an extended outage is one of the most powerful morale-maintaining activities a family can engage in. The smell of food cooking, the gathering of people around a heat source, the routine of preparing and sharing a meal, These are not luxuries. They are psychological anchors that maintain the sense that life is still organized, that the family is still functioning, that the situation is manageable. After the Northeast Blackout, a New York Times reporter documented something that emergency management researchers later confirmed with data. Families who maintained cooking routines, who organized meals, who sat together to eat, regardless of what they were eating, reported significantly lower levels of crisis-related anxiety than families who ate cold food alone or skipped meals because the effort seemed too great. The food itself mattered less than the act of preparing and sharing it. Fire, controlled, outdoor, intentional, is how you do that. And it costs almost nothing to be ready for. But being ready to cook assumes you have food worth cooking. And the next item is about why most households are far less prepared on that front than they believe. Number 3 is the pantry. Not the glamorous emergency food supply. Not the freeze-dried meal pouches with 25-year shelf lives. The ordinary, practical, already familiar foods in your cupboard that store at room temperature, require minimal preparation, and provide real calories during a period when the refrigerator and freezer have become unusable. Here is the uncomfortable truth about the American household pantry in 2025. The average American family has approximately 3 to 5 days of shelf-stable food on hand at any given time. The rest of their weekly calories are either refrigerated, frozen, or represented by fresh items that spoil within days. This has not always been true, and it is a relatively recent development that reflects how thoroughly the modern food supply chain has been optimized for freshness over resilience. In the 1950s and 1960s, the average American pantry held significantly more shelf-stable food as a matter of routine. Canned goods, dried beans, rice, flour, foods that did not require refrigeration and that represented a buffer against disruption. As refrigeration improved, as grocery stores moved toward just-in-time inventory, and as fresh and frozen food became more appealing and affordable, the shelf-stable pantry shrank. Today, the USDA estimates that the average American grocery store has approximately 3 days of inventory on hand at any given time. When disruption hits, when a storm approaches, when panic buying begins, that 3-day buffer disappears in hours. The foods that genuinely work during a power outage are not exotic. They are the foods that humans relied on for centuries before electricity existed. White rice, which stores for 25 or more years in sealed, oxygen-free containers. Dried beans and lentils, dense with protein and calories, storing for a decade or longer. Rolled oats, nutritionally complete, requiring only hot water or even cold soaking. Peanut butter, calorie-dense, requiring no refrigeration after opening, and providing protein and fat in a format that most people will actually eat without complaint. Canned fish, tuna, salmon, sardines, providing complete protein with no cooking required. Hard cheeses and cured meats like salami, which maintain safety at room temperature for days after opening. Honey, which has an essentially infinite shelf life and provides immediate energy. What makes a pantry work in a crisis is not quantity alone. It is variety, caloric density, and the realistic likelihood that your family will actually eat what you have stored. A pantry full of unfamiliar foods that require complex preparation is not a survival asset. It is an optimistic inventory that will go largely unused. The best emergency pantry is an expanded version of what your family already eats. Enough familiar, calorie-dense, shelf-stable food to feed your household for 2 weeks without a grocery store. This is not a dramatic ask. It is a rotation. Buy a little more of the shelf-stable staples you already buy. Eat from the oldest, replace from the newest. The pantry never expires. And when the shelves at the store go bare, which they do quickly every single time a major storm or crisis is announced, you are not in the parking lot. You are at home, and you already have what you need. Number 2 is the item that surprises most people. Not because it is complicated, Because it is so simple, so inexpensive, and so universally overlooked that most households have never deliberately owned one. Number 2 is something most people have not thought about since childhood, if they have thought about it at all. A battery bank or portable power station with genuinely useful capacity, and the specific knowledge of what it can and cannot do. This is not about running your refrigerator from a portable battery. A standard 120-quart refrigerator requires roughly 400 watts of power and runs intermittently throughout the day, consuming somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 watt-hours per day. A portable power station large enough to run a refrigerator costs between $800 and $2,000 and weighs 40 pounds or more. That is not what this item is about. What this item is about is communication survival. The specific, high-value task of keeping phones, radios, LED lights, and small medical devices charged throughout an extended outage. A smartphone running on low power mode with the screen dimmed, location services off, and background refresh disabled consumes roughly 5 to 10% of battery per hour of standby use. A good modern smartphone battery holds approximately 4,000 milliamp hours of charge. That means a fully charged phone in low power mode lasts approximately 2 days of standby, with periodic, brief use for essential calls and information checks. Before dying, a 20,000 milliamp hour portable battery bank, which costs between $30 and $60 and weighs under a pound, can fully recharge that phone 5 times. That is 10 days of communication from a device that fits in a jacket pocket. And that bank itself can be recharged via a small solar panel on a sunny day, creating a communication system that is genuinely renewable without grid power. The knowledge of what to charge first and what to stop using is as important as the battery itself. Most people, in the first hours of an outage, continue using their phones exactly as they did before, streaming video, scrolling news, keeping the screen at full brightness. The battery drops from 100% to 20% in a matter of hours. By the time they realize they needed to conserve it, the conservation window is gone. The rule that emergency management professionals consistently recommend is immediate triage. When an outage appears likely to be extended, put every device immediately into low power mode, stop all non-essential use, and begin treating battery life as a rationed resource. A phone at 20% charge that is properly conserved can still provide 2 to 3 days of essential function. A phone that reaches 0 cannot provide anything. Knowing this, before the power fails, is the entire difference, and it leads to the item we have been building toward. Because every practical preparation, every stored resource, every tool and food item and communication device depends ultimately on the thing we are about to discuss. And it is not physical. It is not something you can order online. And it is the one thing that almost no amount of money can buy at the moment you need it most. Number 1 is not an object. It is not a product. It is not something that requires a purchase or a subscription or a delivery. Number 1 is a household plan. A written, communicated, practiced, family-specific emergency plan that every person in your home understands before an emergency occurs. This sounds anticlimactic. Stay with it. Here is what the research consistently shows across every major grid failure, every extended blackout, every hurricane and ice storm and heat emergency of the last 30 years. The single most reliable predictor of how well a family navigates a crisis is not the number of flashlights they own, not the size of their pantry, not the capacity of their generator. It is whether they had a shared understanding of what to do before the crisis began. The American Red Cross, in post-event surveys conducted after major disasters from Katrina to Sandy to Uri, has documented this finding repeatedly. Households with a pre-existing emergency plan, even a simple one, make better decisions faster, experience less interpersonal conflict, and report lower psychological distress than households without one. The plan does not need to be comprehensive. It needs to exist, to be shared, and to be rehearsed at least once. A household emergency plan answers a specific set of questions. Where do you shelter in this home during a summer heat emergency? And where during a winter cold emergency? Where are the flashlights? Who is responsible for filling the bathtub with water in the first hour of an outage? Who is responsible for checking on elderly neighbors or family members nearby? What is the reunion point if family members are separated when an emergency occurs? Where is the physical copy of important documents, insurance cards, prescription information, emergency contacts? That does not require any device to access. These are not complicated questions. But in the moment of an actual emergency, when the power is out and a child is scared and an adult is anxious and everyone is asking what to do at the same time, the absence of a pre-agreed answer to each of those questions creates exactly the kind of chaos that transforms an inconvenience into a catastrophe. The plan is the most powerful item on this entire list, because it is what allows everything else on the list to function. Cast iron pans are useful if someone knows where they are and knows how to use them. Battery banks preserve communication if someone knows to conserve them immediately. Manual tools, stored water, layered light, temperature management. All of these work better when the household has talked about them before the moment arrives. The 2003 Northeast Blackout lasted up to 4 days for some of the 55 million people affected. The families who managed it best were not necessarily the best equipped. They were the best organized. They had talked about what to do. They had practiced, even informally. They knew who was responsible for what. And when the silence came, when the refrigerator stopped humming and the lights went out and the router went dark, they did not stand there waiting for someone else to fix it. They started. That is the entire point. Preparation is not about fear. It is not about assuming the worst. It is about the specific, quiet, practical confidence of knowing what your household will do before it has to decide in the dark. The people who prepare before a crisis do not panic when one arrives. Panic is what happens in the absence of preparation. The families who sit calmly, who know where the flashlights are, who have water in the pantry and a plan on the wall and a hand crank radio already charged, those families are not scared. They are capable, and capability in the middle of any emergency is the most valuable thing in the world. The best time to build that capability is not when the shelves are empty. It is not when the storm is on radar. It is not when the lights are already out. It is right now, today, when there is still time to be deliberate about it. Because the grid will fail again. Somewhere, for someone, for millions of people perhaps. The question is not whether you will face an extended power outage in your lifetime. The question is whether you will be the household that already knows what to do when it happens. And if you found yourself watching this video and realizing that number 10, the cast iron pan, is sitting unused at the back of your cabinet, and number 9, the stored water, is something you have been meaning to think about, and number 2, the power bank, is on your nightstand at 11% with no plan for what comes next, then you are exactly the person this series was built for. Start with one thing, just one, a water container, a flashlight with fresh batteries, a bag of rice in a sealed jar on a pantry shelf. One thing, done today, is the difference between a household that reacts and a household that responds. There is a follow-up question that this list naturally raises, and it is one that most people in this situation discover only when it is already urgent. If the power fails and the temperature drops or climbs to dangerous levels before any of these preparations are in place, what are the first 3 moves you make in those critical early hours?
How do we fix that?
That question has a specific answer.
The grid will fail.
And it is one worth knowing before the
It's
grid
only a matter
decides
of
to ask it
when.
for you.
Not if.